So, good evening. Welcome to the first class of Meditation 101. We'll meet at this time on Thursdays in February. So we meet 4 times. Is the audio all right for everyone? Is everyone able to hear okay? Great. So let's start by setting our motivation. So this is what we normally do at the beginning of all of our classes, at the beginning of any virtuous activity. It's quite important to generate an altruistic intention. We'll talk more about motivation and intention throughout the course, but in a real way, the motivation that we have going into something plays a critical role in the benefit that we receive from that activity. If we engage in even something of incredible sort of objective value, like going to a teaching by His Holiness, but we do that with the motivation just to impress someone, then we'll miss all of the value of that. Whereas if we do something very simple with a broad motivation, then we familiarize our mind with engaging in activities for that vast purpose. And there's incredible value, even though the activity might be quite mundane. So we will do our best to generate a very broad motivation. So we can think about what thoughts brought us here this evening, and then try to intentionally expand on those thoughts. Try to give ourselves the instruction, the motivation, the intention that will try to find ideas that will help us to be of greater and greater benefit to others. And with that motivation, then when we listen, when we participate, we'll be trying to actualize that motivation. We'll be attempting to find those tools, listening for that purpose, which is much more beneficial. So just try on your own to set a broad motivation. All right. So, as I said, welcome. This is Meditation 101, and if this is your first time taking this class, then what I normally would say is that this class includes guided meditations throughout the 4 weeks, kind of interspersed. But I always tell people as well that this is a class kind of about meditation, kind of in a way about the theory, the practice, kind of the nuts and bolts of meditation. I would say that the purpose of this class really is to try over the course of the 4 weeks to give people the essential information that they need to know to at least start to try to have a practice at home, or perhaps round out a practice that has been started at home. So that, I would say, is the goal of this class. Does anyone have any just general programmatic questions to begin with, or anything that they're kind of wondering about so far before we move into material? No? All right. So, of course, this is a class about meditation. So what do we mean when we say meditation? Our center, Thupten Norbu Ling, is steeped in the Tibetan tradition of Buddhism. So, and particularly, we won't really go into the divisions of Buddhism really either globally or within Tibetan Buddhism in a deep way, but it's true that within Tibetan Buddhism, we are particularly associated with what's called the Gelug tradition, which is the school that is generally most closely associated with His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And Tibetan Buddhism, we can say, is part of what's called the Mahayana tradition, which is a grouping of Buddhist traditions that aim for what is called full enlightenment. So we'll talk a little bit about what that means. So it's true that everything that our center presents is informed by that particular approach, that particular tradition. And in a way that will become relevant mainly when we talk about what's called analytical meditation, which may be new to some folks. It is, I would say, particularly emphasized within Tibetan Buddhism, this particular approach to meditation. And so it's, the lineage is relevant in that sense. And it's also relevant in the sense that although people can have many different reasons why they are interested in meditation, why they want to establish a practice, we will touch on the historical reasons why the Buddha taught meditation and what Mahayana Buddhist practitioners in a way are using meditation to accomplish. And of course, that doesn't have to be a person's motivation. It may not be a person's motivation now, and it may not be a person's motivation ever. And that's all entirely valid and up to the individual. But we will at least kind of acknowledge and introduce why, historically speaking, Buddhism uses meditation and how it is employed. And then even if a person's own individual goal might be not that, we will see how it might fit into parts of that more comprehensive whole. So all of that, I think, might make a bit more sense as we go on. So in English, when we say meditation, from this tradition's perspective, the word, the Tibetan word, and again, this is part of why I introduced those historical and cultural aspects. The Tibetan word that means in English meditation is the word Gom, which is Gom in English transliteration of the Tibetan. And that word, perhaps a better, more defining English word, is the word to become familiar, or familiarization. That's what we mean by meditation. We mean to familiarize the mind. And of course, we don't mean just to familiarize the mind with anything, but the goal, the interest, is to familiarize the mind with a virtuous object, to familiarize the mind with the things that what we will see, the kind of mental states, the kinds of knowledge and wisdom that bring about greater internal peace, contentment, that help us to tap into our potential in greater ways. So it isn't sort of a neutral activity. It's particularly intentional efforts to generate greater familiarity with those sorts of virtuous objects, the things that increase our own positive qualities, our own beneficial, constructive mental states. And therefore, by definition, the extent to which we can do that, we are generating what we could call antidotes to attitudes or perspectives or ways of thinking that Buddhism would assert are the cause, the principal cause of our internal dissatisfaction, our strife, our discontent, and the states that cause conflict, the states that separate people and cause division and conflict. And, Buddhism would even go so far as to say that on a macro level, when you get groupings of people with these tendencies, you get war, you get, economic systems that disadvantage people, you get systemic racism and sexism and all of these are all manifestations of internal mental states that are empowered by disturbing attitudes or afflictive, what we could call afflicted states of mind that become culturally entrenched over time. And of course, Buddhism isn't necessarily saying that it's our job to fix, the world or fix society, but it is our job to fix our own mind, to fix the extent to which these afflicted states are operating in our own mind, and then, of course, to work for the benefit on both a conventional and also spiritual level for others. So, of course, we have some responsibility to respond appropriately and to be a good global citizen in that respect. But as we'll see, that really depends upon, really being successful in that depends upon what's happening in the mind, rather than some kind of outward, because what we'll see is you can't really white knuckle external action truly effectively over the long term. What you ultimately need to do is change the mental states that are empowering those outward actions that are problematic. And so Buddhism is very much focused on the individual taking responsibility for the extent to which they are under the influence of these, not so beneficial, not so useful states of mind. And meditation is the main inner technology that we use to move from being someone who is heavily under the influence of those more so destructive or problematic states, and then to reduce the impact of those. And when we reduce the impact of those, then spontaneously, naturally, and in a stable way, our actions are different. And that's the real approach. That is the most effective approach. it is true, that in the moment when that, if there's strong aversion arising toward someone, then of course in that moment that's what's arising, and we have to, if the best that we can do in that moment is to not say an angry thing, to not wound them with our speech, then great. If we can restrain that wounding with our speech in that moment, then that's the best we could have done. But over time, the idea is that it is the mental state that gave rise to that impulse to wound with our speech. And we can actually reduce that impulse that seems, right now for us, of course, it seems impossible. It seems so strong and so spontaneous, and so outside of our control that we think that it's just the not yelling that we can manage. But Buddhism actually has a much more expansive view of our capacity and our ability to grow beyond that. And that's, as I'm saying, meditation, what we'll see is that meditation is the technology that Buddhism gives us to accomplish that goal. So, of course, as I said, people have many different motivations, and they hear different things. Meditation is something that is ubiquitous in our culture now. It's corporate retreats and so on, and the mindfulness movement, and so we may kind of have a sense that it's about relaxation, or it's about stress reduction. And again, going back to this idea of Buddhism having a very expansive view of our potential, what Buddhism would say is that that is an extremely small side effect, really, of meditation, that it's not the point. It's something that comes by the way. We do get more, a calmer mind, a more, less stress, more spaciousness. But like I said in the beginning, before we started, when I was talking about motivation, it would be like I said, in a way, that would be, in a way, almost akin to going to His Holiness's teachings with the goal of trying to impress our coworker who likes His Holiness. To say that meditation is meant for stress reduction is kind of, to go into it with that perspective is so much more limited than what its historical purpose is. So this is all just kind of something to keep in mind. I'm not trying to suggest that people need to be Buddhist to get something out of it, because what we'll talk about is, of course, that these positive states and these not so positive states, they're ubiquitous to all of humankind. Every person, whether they are Christian or Hindu or atheist, they all have, or Buddhist, they all struggle with anger, they all struggle with jealousy, they all struggle with ill will and covetousness. And so these are not Buddhist, ideas in that sense. Of course, there are perhaps some meditations, some aspects of Buddhist philosophy that someone of a different tradition may not adopt, but many of these ideas and techniques are broadly useful regardless of what sort of religion or other approach a person is coming into the material with. It's a good idea for all people to find effective ways of increasing their familiarity with love and compassion and generosity and patience and ethics, and to reduce the tendencies and the habits of ill will and covetousness and impatience and all these sort of more problematic states. So it doesn't. These are things that are just generally, I think, quite useful and can really be adapted to, and so what I think a lot of people who, to one degree or another, integrate, are maybe attracted to these ideas and maybe integrate these ideas is because this philosophy doesn't just extol the benefits of love and compassion and so on, but there are actual methods. The perspective is that these are states of mind that are trainable. It isn't that, a lot of times we will look at someone and they say, oh, they're a really loving person, or they seem to be a really patient person. And it's almost as if we just think that they were born like that, that it's just, it's genetic in a way, and if I'm not that way, well, then we just sort of give ourselves a pass. We say, well, I've always been impatient, or I've always struggled, with attachment to sensory objects and what have you. So this, going back to this idea of taking control of our mind and taking control for the content of our mind, what's different about this approach is that all of these things are presented as, again, really familiarities. A person is a loving person because they've deeply habituated their mind to that tendency. A person is an impatient person because they've deeply habituated their mind to that tendency. So if there are tendencies that are positive that we wish to embody, Buddhism is going to give us methods to do that, to increase our familiarity with those states. If there are tendencies that we think of as, when they arise, we can see that they cause us pain, they cause us suffering, and they tend to be the kind of states that are present in our mind when we're relating to others in difficult, yelling and screaming and maybe stealing or injuring or, all of the things that people do that are harmful. When those actions are being engaged in, what's happening in the mind are these afflicted states. These are precipitating and empowering these actions that are problematic. So if we can identify that there are some of these that we'd like to have less familiarity with, then Buddhism is going to give us the techniques, the methods, the meditations to accomplish that. And in a way, these are two sides of the same coin in many ways, because loving kindness is an antidote to ill will. You can't bring someone to mind or have someone in front of you and then simultaneously be thinking loving, kind thoughts and also thoughts based on ill will. You can go back and forth between loving kindness and ill will, at different points, different times of the day, different days of the week, even within a 5-minute period, or a 2-minute period, you can kind of have some loving thoughts and then some not so loving thoughts. But in one moment, the thought that you're having is either a loving thought or a thought that's more so related to ill will. And so the more loving thoughts that we can have in a day, the fewer ill will thoughts that by definition we had that day. So in a way, this process of familiarization is a process of crowding out the states that are problematic and replacing them with the states that are constructive, that are useful, that are beneficial. Simply by setting aside time to focus on those constructive states, that means, by definition, we had fewer, less constructive thoughts arising that day. And if we do that day after day after day, month after month, year after year, then we start to shift the content of our mind. We start to really create tendencies and habits and deep-seated familiarities that become more and more spontaneous, that become more and more integrated into our baseline state. And that's really ultimately the goal, is to use this technology to accomplish that, to use this. And by technology, I mean that, we'll talk about the posture, and, there's a whole kind of related body of knowledge, body of wisdom that goes into describing how to do this well. So I usually refer to it like as an inner technology, an inner, because this has been handed down and refined over thousands of years. Even before the Buddha came into the world, there were meditative traditions that he took advantage of, that he was born into a deeply meditative culture, and was able to integrate the parts of that didn't need to be changed or refined, and then add to that other things. And then there was a process of refining and adding that continued for, 1,000 years. So I would say that that's ultimately, so a person can use that technology for a really grand purpose of, as I said, full enlightenment. Or we can think, at least for now, in terms of, well, I have, some jealousy, some ill will, some covetousness, and I would like to would like to have more loving kindness, more compassion, more generosity, more patience. I'd like to find ethical ways of relating to be more spontaneous and easier. And so, it could be that, at least. And then, of course, I would just say, we don't really know what the future holds. So, sometimes people start out there, and then in 5 years, 10 years, they go further. But starting wherever we feel comfortable starting, or whatever makes sense, is where we should start, and we just really build, over time. So I'll pause. Any thoughts, questions, reflections? Just unmute and.
Well, I have some thoughts. I think the way I've been practicing Tibetan Buddhism for a while now. Well, not a long time at all, actually, about 2 years, and taking all kinds of classes from mid-level to occasionally advanced, mainly just sort of middle of the road. But I always struggle with meditation, and the way you have explained it helps me so much to see it in perspective. I wanted to take a ground level meditation class, and that's why I'm here. And the way you are explaining it is so clear. It just resonates. It really helps me. I know I will be able to have a better meditation practice from this. So I just want to say thank you.
Thanks. Okay. So, Phyllis, did you have a question? Or
It's not exactly a question, just wanted to say, yeah, I've been in Tibetan Buddhism off and on for a long time, and I'm struggling at the moment, and and it's, with afflictive thoughts and feelings that keep coming in, and I also know that I'm in a very loving and joyful place when they're not. I mean, around all of that, it's not that I don't have enough of that, but I'm kind of shocked at how obsessive the thoughts are, and when they come up, I say a prayer, and that'll take me right out of it, or a mantra, but sometimes they take me off before I get further into them than I want to, and so I'm so and I sat with Rowena for 2 hours on Thursday and 5 hours on Friday, and walked into my own death, which is wonderful. I could sit down and imagine that me, and was perfectly calm and peaceful and healed by that. I never dreamed that was even possible, but something about that situation was so healing. I recommend, not that I wasn't afraid, but I just felt it was really important. I'm 77, so certainly, I'm facing that realm, but still hear those thoughts. And so I just want to say that I'm so happy to see you're teaching this, and I have never walked through it like this. I mean, certainly I've heard pieces of it, but I so appreciate that you're teaching, and that I don't know a lot of the things you're saying, and I'm really curious about the ideas of how to change the afflictive thoughts and feelings that come up. So thank you so much, and I also appreciate, Susan, that you spoke. It was easier for me to speak and say why I'm here. So I'm in a very special, amazing place because of sitting with Rowena, and feels like a really good time to address this obsessive thinking that's going on, that was stimulated by my choice to move away from something, and now I'm obsessed, But I really got the message that if I would move away from that situation, there would be an opening, and certainly the opening is happening, and I'm suffering part of it a lot. Thank you all for listening.
thank you for sharing.
Can I add one more thing?
Yep.
Thank you, Phyllis. I mean, you've been doing this a lot more than I, and you really, just by saying those things, helped me understand it more deeply. The benefit is, it's just so profound. So anyway, thank you for sharing that. Appreciate it.
Okay, so going along with this idea of thinking about it as a technology, then of course, meditation is something that we do with the mind, but the body, does play a role. Mind and body are interconnected, interrelated. What's happening in the body influences the mind, and vice versa. So it's important to think about the posture that we set the body in when we meditate. It's important to think about what we do with the physical body in meditation, to create a conducive state, to put the body in a physical posture that's conducive for meditation, because. In particular, also because at the deeper stages of meditation, there's sort of a relaxation response that happens in the body, and when the mind is really deeply absorbed in meditation, there's a relaxation response that can happen in the body. And if the body doesn't have the right kind of physical posture, then it can be an obstacle to maintaining that state of mind, that kind of absorption. And so we need to practice that. Ideally we should, from the beginning, practice setting the body in that state so that we develop those good habits, and then eventually we don't run into any kind of obstacle. We're setting ourselves up to be successful from the very beginning. So there's what's called the 7-point posture, the 7-point Vajrayana posture. So we will go through these different points. So we start with figuring out what to do with the legs. And so the ideal posture with the body is to be on a cushion rather than a chair. A chair is okay. A chair is fine if that's what people do different things, and if a chair is what works, then a chair is fine. But ideally, historically speaking, we would want to try to be on a cushion. And so if we're on a cushion, then our legs can be in one of 3 positions. Of course, if we're in a chair, then the goal is just to have the feet flat on the ground. And so we don't want to cross the legs. We don't want to have like one leg up and one leg down. We don't like tuck one leg up on the chair and one leg down. We want to just keep the feet flat. So that might involve, a cushion or something underneath to support the feet. But if we're on a cushion, then our feet, are kind of out in front more so. And then there's 3 options. One option, so we'll go in the reverse sort of level of difficulty. So the easiest option, the thing that most people do, is just a normal cross-legged position, the Burmese posture, which is just cross-legged. So you're seated on a cushion on the floor, and your legs are just tucked and crossed. That's okay. It's not the most stable position. The second best position is what's called the half lotus. So if it's possible, we try to take one foot and rest it on one thigh, and then tuck the other foot underneath. So we kind of, we're going to pull one foot up onto one thigh and tuck the other foot underneath. That's a bit more stable than just cross-legged. So it's a little bit, if you can do that, it's a little bit better. Now, there isn't really a lot of teaching in Tibetan Buddhism about becoming more flexible. There's yoga, of course, but yoga is from the Hindu tradition, and there isn't really something similar in Tibetan Buddhism. Yoga is great, and so if that's what people want to do, that really can help to become more flexible. But there isn't really like a method in Tibetan Buddhism that's widely taught for accomplishing that. Really what they say is at the beginning of a session to get as close to the half lotus as you can, even for just a couple of seconds. So, to start, if you're cross-legged, then whatever you can do in between cross-legged and this half lotus, as long as it's not painful, to just do it for a couple seconds. If there's actual pain, then definitely don't do anything like that. If it's just a little bit uncomfortable and a little bit kind of like, there's some tension, then, for a couple seconds, you just kind of do that. And then you can go back to cross-legged. And if you start every session like that, then eventually you're kind of stretching things out, and what they would say is that within maybe a couple years, you will be able to get into the full Vajra position. If you progressively, for a couple seconds at the beginning of every session, kind of do this stretching thing where you just do the best you can, again, as long as there's no pain at all. That's really the best. But again, like I said, there is yoga. There are, if you go on YouTube, you can find like stretches for meditation. There are other technologies, other more modern things. I think in Tibetan Buddhism, really, because a lot of this wisdom was written by monks for other monks, and they all kind of started when they were quite young, when their bodies were more flexible. I don't think it was really much of an issue for a lot of them. They just sort of learned to do it. So they didn't really come up with like a exercise sort of system. But there are books about flexibility for meditation, and there are things you can investigate. And like I said, yoga is certainly an option. So that's the half lotus or half Vajra position. The best thing, if it's possible, the best way to do it is to rest each foot on each opposing thigh, which again, that could take, again, using this process of like, a couple seconds, maybe in a few years, maybe you could work up to that. I don't know. It's very difficult for most people. Even just one foot is very difficult for most people, but so, but just to say that is considered the most stable position, is resting each foot on each opposing thigh. Okay, so we do one of those three things with the legs as we're seated on this cushion. The next is the back. So the back is really the most important part of the position. So we want our back to be very straight. So we want to think, because when the back is straight, the energies, as I mentioned, the mind and the body are connected, and the energies do need to flow in an unobstructed way through the body to really be able to be, conducive, serviceable for meditation. So having the back be straight and upright, as opposed to slouching or leaning, you want this kind of stable, upright position. It's really very important. So we do want to think about, even during the session, after 5 minutes, have I started to slouch? Have I started to lean? Have I kind of lost this upright posture? So we want to kind of maintain an awareness of that and try to correct, even over the course of the 10 minutes or 20 minutes as we're meditating. We want to kind of be like, oh yeah, I've started to slouch a bit. I need to kind of bring some uprightness to my posture so that the energies. But again, we want to try to avoid rigidity or stiffness. But so the posture is relaxed. But in a way, I think once people get the hang of it, it's kind of like the body rests on itself. It's kind of like the body sort of hangs on the skeleton. The skeleton itself is supporting the body, but the body is kind of resting on it. It's not that we are uptight. It's just that the body is kind of falling into place. It's kind of just resting on a stable foundation. But at the beginning, when this is new, there are a lot of small muscles, stabilizing muscles, in the low back that we don't really use that much, that, will fatigue, and we can get some soreness, some uncomfortable feelings. And again, there's a lot of tightness in the legs and in the knees and the hips, and that can be a little uncomfortable. So that's one reason why we'll talk about keeping the sessions of meditation quite short for a long time, so that we can gradually increase our capacities. Yeah. And having the cushion, does help with this when we are elevated. The knees, having the cushion kind of reduces pressure on the knees. It gives the body kind of a downward slope, downward angle, and that is quite helpful. So, you may have to look at different kinds of cushions, different heights of cushions, different shapes, to really kind of figure out. Some people prefer a very kind of, maybe just 2 inches. Some people go more like 6 or 8 inches in their cushion. So you really have to just sort of figure out what works for your own body and what feels good, and what helps you to kind of get into and maintain this position over time. Yeah. So that's the legs and the back, and then the hands and the arms. So there's different, normally what is done is right hand over left hand with the thumbs touching just gently, and then resting up against the body in the lap. So not like tightly pressed into the body, but also not like near the knees, resting right up against the body with just a loose belly, and the hands just resting right up against a loose, relaxed belly, like that. You can, if you prefer, just having your hands just palms down on your thighs, that's also fine. The kind of thing that you see, like, I don't know, like this, or that's not really a Tibetan Buddhist thing. I mean, it's a mudra, it can be a mudra, but it's not like a typical position to normally keep your hands in. Again, with this, you're kind of completing an energy circuit in the body, which is quite helpful for meditation. So to have it resting up against the body and having the hands and the thumbs connected, it's kind of completing this upper energy circuit. So it's quite helpful. What you want to definitely avoid, is having your arms just kind of dangling here by your side. That's not helpful, because all of the blood is going to pool into your hands. Your hands are going to fall asleep. You don't want to do that. You want the arms and the hands, supported by the legs. So that's, I would say, one of those two, either, like this, or just, kind of resting on the knees, on the thighs. But really, this is the posture that's taught. And then the shoulders and arm, and again, so, we maintain an upright spine, but we, kind of relax the shoulders. We kind of just let them, again, fall, thinking about the body just kind of falling into place, kind of hanging on itself. And then you want your elbows, not tightly pressed against your body at all, but also not like chicken arms, but, just kind of slightly allowing some airflow. You want to think about, having airflow around the arms and the underarms. So you want to keep them a little bit out from the body, but not so that it's something that you're like thinking about, but also, but just kind of natural. And then the eyes. So the eyes, in a way, it's kind of personal. Some people really, and I would say it has a lot to do with how much light it happens to be in the room that you're in while you're meditating. You do the whole purpose of the posture really is alertness, to facilitate alertness in the mind. So if it's a dark room and your eyes are tightly closed or fully closed, then you'll tend toward drowsiness. If there's a lot of light in the room, then if your eyes are gently closed, you'll probably still be okay. But I will say that having the eyes slightly open is the position that's more generally like actively taught, actively encouraged. So not having them, just where there's a very, very small kind of slit of light at the bottom of the eyes is better than having them closed. If you find one or the other really distracting, really, I would just say, try, if you've been meditating with your eyes closed for a long time, you might find it difficult to switch. So if that's the case, then I would just kind of think about how much ambient light do I have, making sure that I'm not turning off a bunch of lights and then closing my eyes. I would just make sure that there's enough ambient light so that you maintain alertness. And then if your eyes are slightly open, you want an unfocused downward gaze. So you don't want to try to focus on anything in particular. You don't want to try to just keep, you just want a broad kind of unfocused, hazy, downward gaze where you might kind of see some colors, some outlines, but not that you're holding your attention to a pencil or, some particular part of the visual field. You want just a very unfocused visual field. Okay, and then, the mouth, the tongue, the jaw, your tongue and your mouth should be relaxed without clenching. You want your teeth, kind of slightly apart. The lips should be gently closed. And they say if you can, think about resting the tongue on the upper palate. It kind of depends on how big your mouth is and how big your tongue is. Sometimes it's just kind of all in there together. But if you can, try to think about sort of resting the tongue on the upper palate as you start to meditate, which they say that the purpose of that is it reduces the number of times that you might need to swallow during the course of the meditation, which can be sort of a distracting thing, if you're constantly swallowing, that can just sort of bring you out of your focus. And then your head should be just sort of slightly, so again, thinking about centering the head in the body, so, not kind of, leaning to one side. That goes with the general posture, and then just having it be focused slightly downward, just so of course you're not looking up at the ceiling and you're not also looking straight down. It's relatively straight, but it is slightly angled downward. So you basically want to think about the chin just being a little bit tucked in, to the body. So, if this is literally completely straight, then, your meditation is more so, like this, where it's maybe 15, 20 degrees, kind of downward from perfectly level. And then just kind of see what you feel like is comfortable with that. And that's, those are the seven main points for the body. Any thoughts or questions?
Oh, I'm sorry. I have a question. Losang, why why is sitting meditation considered better than standing meditation? Is standing meditation more a physical body healing thing, and sitting is more what we're trying to attain in Tibetan Buddhism? Because sometimes when I'm sitting, my legs go to sleep. They go to sleep. Cuts off circulation. Standing, the energy, I can feel it running.
Yeah, I would say, I would say sort of like walking meditation, that sort of thing. It's not particularly emphasized in Tibetan Buddhism. You find it to some degree, but it's not. I would say again, because meditation is something that we're trying to do with the mind, then I would say that the more that we can kind of forget about of course, walking, moving meditation, walking meditation, there's benefits to that. It can help you to be more mindful of your surroundings. It can help you to kind of maintain, more of like a centered, calm state in, kind of just out in the world. It can help you to, but when a person is like doing analytical meditation or, of course, in one way of thinking, we can always integrate, meditation, more broadly speaking, into daily life, so we can take 5 minutes, as we, when we park the car before we go into work, we can take 5 minutes at our desk, at lunch. So there's certainly ways, and incredibly useful to try to integrate, quote unquote, meditation in those sort of less technical ways. But having an actual formal seated practice is just also really important. I think it's probably the state where the mind is able to reach the highest degree of concentration, the highest degree of subtle stability on an intentional or a chosen object, because it has just the least amount of other things going on. So it plays a really important role in a person's spiritual life. But if you really like walking meditation, then certainly do it every day. No one's saying not to do it, and certainly not to, no one's saying don't try to find other opportunities to do a couple of minutes, even when, of course, you're not at home, your cushion's not there, you're at work, you're in a chair, or you're waiting for a board meeting to start, or whatever it might be. Of course, we should try to take, or even, as you're saying, like standing in line at the grocery store, we can certainly have love. We can, have loving thoughts about the people in front of us. And, so there's all kinds of other ways. It's just, in terms of formal practice, we're encouraged to integrate this sort of approach.
Thank you.
Any other thoughts or questions? Speaking of the back, back is, it's late in the day. No other questions? Okay, so we can talk then about two of the main sort of skills of that we use in meditation. And so we can talk about, I mentioned the word mindfulness earlier. So mindfulness is one skill and concentration is the other. So these are interrelated mental skills that we employ in meditation. And so they're similar, but they're also a bit different. So concentration is the ability of the mind to fix our attention on a chosen object without distraction. So one possible way of thinking about meditation, or one way of defining meditation, we said that it's to familiarize the mind with a virtuous object, but we have to do that by, for one, choosing the virtuous object. So deciding that we're going to do a meditation on love or compassion or generosity or what have you, and then trying to fix our attention to that object without, and here the phrase without distraction is important, because we know that when we try to meditate, the mind will go to, what we want to have for dinner. It will go to some disagreement that we had with someone. But we could think about meditation as the gradual ability to, or the gradual perfection of the ability to concentrate the mind on a chosen virtuous object. And this, in a way, is also getting at what I was saying before about the sort of very broad, expansive perspective that Buddhism has about our mind, about our capacity, because we feel probably as though those distractions are natural. Of course they are. Of course they are natural, but we kind of feel like because they're natural, because we've always experienced them, that they are baked into the nature of the mind, that they are not really removable. And just like I was saying about positive mental states, love, compassion, etc., and how Buddhism presents those as trainable states that we can increase over time, concentration is another one of these trainable states. So we're not left with the degree of concentration that we feel like we presently have. We'll talk at some point over the course about this idea of single-pointed concentration and the 9 levels of calm abiding. Dr. Nick did a bit of a teaching on that. You can find it. He just did it a couple of weeks ago, where he was teaching on, he did a day-long class on, the topic is escaping me, but he touched on concentration. He gave a teaching on the nine levels of calm abiding, and that's something that we'll go into also. So, point being that Buddhism understands through 2,500 years of direct empirical evidence that people can develop the ability to concentrate to a level that we would think is not possible, that a level that, if you were to ask a Western scientist, how long can a person concentrate for, they would say, 30 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes, literally not just like stay on task, but literally not waver at all from the object. They would say that, well, no, of course, some other intrusive thought, some other idea, some other perception is going to enter the mind after, a minute at best. But Buddhism would say, no, that's absolutely not true. It is possible with great effort to be able to remain in a completely undistracted way on a chosen object. Even Dr. Nick was saying, even for weeks, because I would imagine, the only way that could be true is that, that the body, again, that sort of relaxation response, that the body actually reduces its need for food and water and beyond what we understand is normal. But that is something that Buddhism says is possible and is unavoidable, really, if we try hard enough, that we will develop it if we apply ourselves. So that's concentration. The ability, the capacity of the mind to remain on an object without distraction. And for us, of course, that distraction arises within a couple of seconds, but we can progress beyond that eventually. And then mindfulness is a bit of a different skill. This is more of an observation. It's a little bit more global in its perspective or in its scope. So concentration in a way is like a laser beam. Concentration is, here's the object and my mind is glued to the object. Mindfulness is a bit more observant in a broader way. And it's kind of saying, what's happening in the session of meditation? Has my attention, has my concentration, has it moved from the object into something else? So as we're trying to hold the mind with concentration to the object, we're also using here called mindfulness, sometimes translated as introspective awareness, to determine how successful we're being at our concentration. Because we want to move the mind back to the object when it wanders. We want to notice, okay, we can just take a simple example of like a breathing meditation, the physical sensation, usually in the nostrils or around the nostrils, that accompanies the in-breath and the out-breath. So we know going into that 10-minute session of meditation what the object is. It's that one physical sensation. And so for the purposes of that 10 minutes, anything that arises in the mind that isn't the sensation that it's accompanying the in-breath and the out-breath in the nostrils is a distraction. And we want to, and so the extent to which we can stay with that sensation during the inhalation, during the exhalation, that's concentration. And then, as we know, other things are going to happen in the mind, other thoughts and sensations will be arising. And we want to recognize quickly that there was attention to the breath and now there's attention to whatever, to thinking about food or thinking about, the person who cut us off on the road earlier that day, whatever it might be. Ideally, we want to identify the moment that the mind has shifted from the sensation to the thinking. And then we want to just bring the mind back. We want to lift our attention up from that thought and place it back on that sensation. And then we want to know again very quickly that a thought has arisen that's not this physical sensation. And again, lift our attention from that thought and again place it back on that sensation. So that's what mindfulness is doing. It is paying attention to the session of meditation and alerting us to, hey, you're supposed to be doing this, but you're actually doing this. It's time to go back to what you're supposed to be doing. And that process of having an intended object going into the session, because of course, if we don't have an intended object, then we're not meditating. We have to know. We have to decide, okay, this is a 10-minute meditation on X topic, on X, object. Otherwise, it's just daydreaming. And then we want to make an effort to hold the mind to that object. And we want to know when something that isn't that object is what we're actually attending to, and then bringing the mind back. So mindfulness or introspective awareness is reinforcing our ability to concentrate. And this is the process. This is how concentration is developed. This is how we get better at concentration, is by knowing what our object is, by attending to what's happening, noticing the arising of distraction, gently lifting attention from the distraction, placing it back on the intended object, noticing again, lifting again, and placing again. So in a way, it's like going to the gym. When we go to the gym, we're engaging in some sort of repetitive process over and over again. It could be on the treadmill, could be lifting weights, whatever it is. And we don't get mad at the dumbbell, right? We don't get mad. We might get tired, and again, because the mind also gets fatigued. The body might get fatigued, but we're not surprised, right? When we go to the gym and the treadmill is there, and we know that the job is to just do this repetitive walking motion or running motion, or that the job is to pick up the heavy thing and put it down and pick up the heavy thing and put it down. We know that that's why we went to the gym, and that's why the equipment is in the gym, and we recognize that by doing that repetitive process, I will be stronger, faster, better, more able to do this physical skill. But for some reason, when we try to meditate, we give it a moralistic quality. We think that distraction is a moral failing. We think that I must be the worst person who's ever tried to meditate, because when I try to meditate, there's distraction in the mind. But the process of noticing and dealing with distraction is the only mechanism that exists for developing concentration. Just like picking up heavy things over and over again is all we have for making stronger muscles. And so it's not, we should be happy that we've noticed distraction, and we should be happy the more and more and more that we notice distraction, because all we're doing is recognizing how discursive the mind naturally is, how the mind naturally moves here and there, because we're trying to not do that. We're trying to tame that tendency and instead have the mind be serviceable for what we would like it to do, which is to remain concentrated on a chosen object, which the mind isn't naturally very good at. the mind is naturally kind of unfocused and flighty. So just like, the body isn't naturally very strong, if we don't exercise at all, the body will kind of, just kind of be the bare minimum that we need it to be. It's only by intentionally training the body that we move in the direction of that kind of strength. And it's only by training the mind that we move in the direction of real concentration. So we just have to recognize that that's the mechanism, that's the process, and there's nothing strange about it. It's not like this is just happening to me, or that this didn't happen to the Buddha, or that this didn't happen to all of the other great meditators. They all started in the same place, and they just didn't give up. They just kept dealing with distraction, and they kept going. And that's the only difference between them and us, is that we're just starting, and when they were just starting, they kept going. So as long as we start and we keep going, we'll get in the same place. We'll get the same results. We just have to do what other people have done. In the same way that, if we want a degree in English literature, well, our society knows how to do that. That knowledge exists. We know we have to go to this particular school, we have to read these books, we have to be able to write this kind of a thing, and when we graduate from that, then we will be the same as all of the other people who've graduated from that. We'll have the same competencies, the same abilities that they have. And this is exactly the same, that by following in the footsteps of what the Buddha has shown, we will also get those results. Any thoughts or questions?
I find myself reacting this last half hour and going, yes, but, yes, but, yes, but, okay? And I'm not going to say what they're about, because there's about 3 of them, but I'd rather just work through it and start by doing one of like having direction to do the first meditation and do what you're saying in a short amount of time with one foot on one thigh. Okay. That I could do, and I didn't really understand that would make my sitting space sturdier. So I thank you.
Yeah, I mean, what they say is the most stable position is, the ideal is to have both feet on, but even if all we really can do is cross-legged, then we do that, and then, but again, for a couple seconds we try, and then we just, even if like we can only get the foot up to the shin then we just do that, and then, so yeah, that kind of, and of course, if a person feels like a chair is what works for them, and that's okay. There's no, Maitreya, he's in a chair, and it's fine. And the future Buddha, it's always in a chair, so it's fine. But yeah, if we want to try to think about. Because again, the thing is, at our level, at a beginner level, it's hard to see the difference. It's hard to see the difference in the posture. And the thinking really is that we're setting ourselves up for success in the long term by having good, we don't have to unlearn bad habits.
I have a question. And that is, what is the purpose of the right hand being in the left hand, resting in the left hand? Does it have a physiological purpose?
I don't, to some degree, they say that the right and the left, it's a complicated question in a way, because I think that there's a certain school of thinking that where the posture is, as I mentioned, it has to do with the energies of the body. And there's what's called the central channel and the right and the left channels. And then there's this, the completion of this energy circuit. So in a way, they talk about like desire and aversion kind of being associated with different energies. So in a way, it has to do with balancing and controlling. The idea is that there are certain afflicted states that kind of ride on certain energies that flow, and it has to do with trying to set yourself up in a way that is sort of taming or controlling those to some degree. And I don't know, it could also just be maybe that a lot of people are right-handed too, and so maybe it just kind of feels more natural for most people. To me, leftover right feels very awkward, but I don't know, maybe that's just because I've never done it. To me, it just feels more, natural. But yeah, I think the kind of ultimate, answer is that it's related to the energies and that sort of circuit of energy.
Thank you. I just wondered if maybe it has something to do with the blood flows into and out of the heart too, which would create a certain energy. There could be, physiological, could be that sometimes when they talk about energy, there's a subtle part of that, and then there's a coarser part of that. There's like a anatomical manifestation of things that also have a really, really subtle component. So yeah, it could be that you can talk about things in different levels of subtlety or anatomical coarseness. So we just have a couple minutes before either. So what I'll do is I'll talk about two meditations, and then I'll encourage people to practice them over this week. The two, and let me see if I can. Let's see what if I. Well, as I'm doing that, I'll just talk about. So the first, I talked about a breathing meditation. So I kind of addressed that, the idea of a breathing meditation, as I said. Yeah, so in the materials link, that's what I was. So if you go to the handout, if you go to the materials link, and then you go to the handouts, this would be counting the breaths, and then bare attention. These are the two meditations and you don't have to do it now, but it's on the event page in the materials link and then in the handouts folder. So you can read those two. Those are the two that I'd like people to maybe practice this week. So as I mentioned, the breathing meditation is literally adopting as best you can, that the seated posture, and then giving yourself the instruction that the object of meditation is the physical sensation accompanying the in-breath and the out-breath in the space around the nostrils. So you literally just try to notice when there's anything that isn't that arising in the mind, and then bringing yourself back over and over again.
bear aware, and so that meditation will emphasize that skill of concentration. And then bare awareness is a little bit different. With bare awareness, you are thinking more about just observing what arises in the body. So you're not just holding yourself to the physical sensation, but you're kind of more globally paying attention to what's happening in the mind as you're doing that. So it isn't, you're still doing a breathing meditation, but you're emphasizing like what is occurring in the mind as you're trying to do that. So the emphasis as you're doing the bare awareness meditation, you're like recognizing that there's distraction, but not necessarily only going back to the breath again and again, but just kind of staying with the sensation and what's happening in the body, happening in the mind as you're trying to do that. So, you're kind of staying with the flow of the mental events that are unfolding in the mind and just really trying to be aware. You're trying to bring conscious awareness to the flow of mental events that are happening in the mind rather than being more kind of tightly focused to just one sensation. But those handouts are in the materials link. So we'll talk about people's experience engaging with those. Try to, try to do maybe one, do them each every day if you can, one in the morning, one in the evening, if possible, or, just do one every day if you can. So they will emphasize the meditation on the breath will emphasize concentration, and then the bare awareness meditation emphasizes mindfulness, the ability to just be aware of what's happening in the mind. Any concluding thoughts or questions?
I missed what you told us to read in in materials.
So the two handouts, it's handout 4 and handout 2 and handout 4 on the event page. So you go to today's event page, then the materials link, then the handouts folder, and handout 4 and 2. One is called Counting the Breaths, and the other is called Bare Attention Exercise.
Okay.
Any other questions?
No, thank you very much for this class. It's helpful. I feel I'm benefiting a lot from it. So thank you for that.
So we'll and Katie, did you have, or Kate, I'm sorry, Kate.
I just wanted to say thank you very much for the clarity that you've explained this and with the compassion you've shown. Greatly appreciate you.
Okay. So at the beginning of the class, we set virtuous motivation, and so then at the end of a class, we do what's called dedicating. So we just kind of recollect that we set a virtuous motivation, and we think that by having set that motivation and then trying to follow through and actualize it, that positive energy has been created in the mind. And then we just kind of have this sense of offering that positive energy for the benefit of others, for just kind of letting it go. And it's really an antidote to the ego co-opting our practice. We can kind of feel like, oh, I did this really amazing thing, and then that really just feeds our ego. So if we let our practice go, then we reduce that tendency. So just on your own, try to recollect your virtuous motivation and recognize that that motivation created positive energy, and then just feel like that positive energy is something that you offer to others. All right. So we meet every Thursday, next 3 Thursdays. And then next month is Buddhism in a Nutshell for people who haven't taken that. Bob will be offering that again. Thursdays is always one or the other, Buddhism in a Nutshell or Meditation 101 every month. So we alternate. All right. Well, I hope to see everyone next week.